As a result, Richard Falk says that the Israeli attacks to begin with were a prohibited, non-defensive use of force under the UN Charter and actually constitute a crime against peace. Now, I think these kind of things were clear to a lot of people around the world, even though they may not have framed them in this way. The collective punishment of the Gaza population throughout the months of siege, before the war, during the war, and after the war, is actually a war crime. You have no right as a state to collectively punish an entire population. And Richard Falk has described it as a crime against humanity. I think maybe what was particularly horrifying about Gaza, and again, everyone who in any way watched TV or consumed any news media during December and January could see this. What was particularly horrifying was that the population had nowhere to flee. And Richard Falk identifies this as another perhaps introducing a new violation of international law and human rights, the right to seek refuge. The Palestinians in Gaza were completely surrounded by a barrier by Israel, and all the Israeli crossings were closed, and Egypt did not open its crossing with Gaza, so they had to stay there and just be bombarded in an area which is effectively just twice the size of Washington, and be bombarded for over 3 weeks. The war also exposed the behavior of the Israeli army when soldiers revealed, and this was in all the mainstream press actually, including the New York Times, when soldiers said, well, they'd basically been told not to spare civilian lives. The New York Times also carried another very shocking story about the behavior of the Israeli soldiers, namely their production of T-shirts to commemorate their service in a war, and some of the T-shirts had images as crude and as awful as a soldier pointing at a pregnant woman and saying, 1 shot, 2 kills. The war revealed this aspect. Now, the war was followed by within a few weeks, the election of the most right-wing government that Israel's had, probably. And the positions of members of this government, like Avigdor Lieberman, who's the foreign minister, foreign secretary, have come to further expose Israel's treatment of the Palestinians under occupation, but also Israel's treatment of its own citizens. There are about a fifth of Israel's citizens are Palestinians, and as I'm sure you know, Avigdor Lieberman would very much like them out of there, or to have them completely controlled by, for example, swearing a loyalty oath that Israel is a Jewish state, i.e. swearing that they themselves do not count for anything within Israel. So, in short, the flagrant injustice and sheer horror of the war on Gaza has exposed the nature of this conflict. And in this conflict, framing the discourse is really important. The person who is able to frame the discourse then is able to shape the nature of the conflict. Okay, I want to quickly talk about conditions in Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem today at the present time. Of course, Gaza is still under siege. Only the bare minimum of food and medicine and fuel gets in. And I would encourage you all to go to the website of the UN Office of the Humanitarian Coordinator, which is OCHAOPT.org. That's OCHAOPT.org. And read some of the reports. They're very short, and they're accompanied by very good maps. And they tell you what's going on week to week. Now, don't forget that in Gaza about 4,000 homes were destroyed and several thousand others were damaged. Well, no reconstruction materials have been allowed in yet that will allow these homes to be rebuilt. And some Palestinians in Gaza are so desperate, they're rebuilding from mud. Although billions of dollars have been pledged in aid to Gaza, nothing really can get in due to the blockade, which is Israeli blockade is very tight on land and also at sea. Palestinian fishermen can't go beyond a 3-kilometer radius, 3 miles, I believe, from the coast to fish, which is where the real catch is. Otherwise, they are fired on. So a lot of what comes into Gaza is smuggled in through tunnels, which is a very dangerous business. During the course of 2008, 46 Palestinians were killed in those tunnels as they tried to bring in goods, and another 69 were injured. Actually, a Palestinian was killed just a week ago in a tunnel, and about 6 others were trapped for several hours. I mean, can you imagine such a life where you have to smuggle things in underground to survive? Now, as horrible as the situation in Gaza is, in some ways it's a red herring for to cover up what's going on in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem. While everybody's focused on the siege and trying to get food in, and people are really the international community is really busy with what's going on in Gaza, the Israel settlement project in the West Bank and East Jerusalem is proceeding at a breakneck speed, in spite of what the Obama administration is calling for. And it's continued, as I've said, no matter which Israeli government has been in power. During the last quarter of 2008, 454 new housing units were started in the West Bank, and another 3,229 were under construction. The Israeli group Peace Now, which monitors the settlements, says that the Israeli Ministry of Housing wants to build another 73,000 housing units. This is in illegally occupied land, Palestinian land in the West Bank, which of course means taking farms, orchards, water, etc., just to build for illegal colonizers. So it wants to build another 73,000 housing units, and about 15,000 have received approval. Now, you can't carry out the settlement project in the West Bank and East Jerusalem unless you control the population and you control any resistance by the population against what's happening to their land and their country. So there are constant incursions by Israeli forces, constant arrests and attacks. And I just want to take the example of 1 week in May, and these figures are from, as I say, OCHA, which I encourage you to look. During 1 week in May, Israeli security forces injured 23 Palestinians, including 8 children, in the West Bank in various incidents. And this is the same as the weekly average throughout the first quarter of 2009. So this is going on all the time. And it's the same as the weekly average of all of 2008. And a lot of these injuries happen when Palestinians are protesting the seizure of their land to build the separation wall. So there are continuous arrests, incursions. As you know, probably there's about 11,000 Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails at the moment. And, talk about population control. Over the course of the occupation from 1967 to now, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have actually been through Israeli jails. So it's estimated, some estimates have it, that about a quarter of the population of the West Bank and East Jerusalem at any one time has been through Israeli jails. Israel continues to demolish Palestinian homes, including and especially in East Jerusalem. And just during the last week of June, there were 3 such demolitions of Palestinian homes, including 2 that were forced self-demolitions, i.e. Palestinians had to demolish their own homes. 11 Palestinians were displaced,